Hello YouTube. Um, Today I'd like to speak about some misconceptions that people have about Zimbabwe. And the first misconception that I'm going to cover in this video is democracy. Often people portray Zimbabwe as if it is the worst democracy on earth, or maybe even the worst democracy in Africa. But and this is the image that is really portrayed on BBC or ABC. But one thing I realize is that it's not only these foreign media houses that actually portray this image, but Zimbabweans themselves actually feel vindicated when they speak about Zimbabwe in a negative way. It's almost like we fear speaking about our country in a positive way. And I just wanted to touch on a few issues. And regarding democracy, I would like to begin by saying that from all my calculations or my logical reasoning, I've really deciphered that by any standard, Zimbabwe will easily sit as a top 10 democracy in Africa. And some of you are gasping for air at this point, and I will just clarify that if you compare Zimbabwe with Swaziland, which is an absolute monarchy where there is no democracy, the king rules by decree. You compare Zimbabwe with Zambia, where they had disputed elections last year and no one actually did anything about it. You look at Madagascar, you look at Kenya, where they had their disputed elections and they formed a government of national unity as well, and even till today, after a year of service, their government still hasn't achieved the amount of stuff that the Zimbabwean government has achieved in a matter of 2 months. And just looking at this comparison, I can go on and on. You can compare with DRC, you can compare with Somalia, you can compare with so many other countries in Africa. And when you actually compare, you realize that Zimbabwe is certainly not a democracy, but Zimbabwe is what one should call a pseudo-democracy. In the same way you have so-called developed nations, and then you have developing nations, but in the middle you have industrializing nations. And really, in a sense, people need to have those definitions for democracy as well. There is always an intermediate. And from now, I will quickly go on to the definition of the word democracy. Democracy comes from the word Demos-Crutis. And these are Greek words meaning literally people power. And, well, it's really self-explanatory, people power. And if you look at the world, really, frankly, you will realize that there is actually no such thing as democracy in practice, at least on national scales. There may be on very local scales in villages and towns, but in terms of a national scale, there is no pure democracy. For example, I'll just give you a quick example. You take the Iraq War. Most of the British populace was against the Iraq War, but the British government still went on and went to war. But if the theory or the philosophy of democracy or Demos-Crutis was true in Britain, the people would prevail. If the people say no war, then there will be no war. Even if Iraq had 20 missiles pointed at Britain, if the British people said no war, there should have been no war. That is democracy. It is an absolute. So therefore, I come to the point that democracy is a spectrum, and within the spectrum lies all the countries of the earth. You have America on one part of the spectrum. You have Zimbabwe. You have China. You have Japan. You have Russia. You have Great Britain, France, Germany, Italy, etc. And when you then look at this, you realize that, okay, truly, there is no such thing as a pure democracy. So then you then say, okay, if there is no such thing as democracy, then the only way I can compare democracy is relative. Is Britain a democracy relative to America, or is America a democracy relative to Zimbabwe? And if I just step out of Africa for now, because I just compared Zimbabwe with other African countries, if I step out and I look at the world, in a global scale, I would say Zimbabwe easily fits into the top 70 democracies on earth. And some of you, again, are probably gasping for air at this point. But the reason I say this is that look at some of the countries like China. China is literally a one-party state. There are no elections in China. The only elections there are is to elect party officials from one political party. So there is no democracy to speak of, really. You go to Pakistan, which was recently a military dictatorship. And you go on to Russia. Well, Russia is probably a great, well, not a great democracy, but a relative democracy, really. But you can go to so many countries on earth and you will realize that, wait a minute, these countries are not democracies at all. And then the question is, why is it that most of the fingers in the world are pointed at Zimbabwe, where Zimbabwe, according to George Bush, is the sixth country in the axis of evil? And when George Bush said that, I was just like, George, do you know that Pakistan, a country that you fund over $20 billion each year, is not even a democracy? Do you know that, George? And surely I don't think George did know. But nonetheless, we can go on and compare other democracies on earth, such as how do you compare Britain and, the USA and Zimbabwe? You then realize that the United States is a country that flouted its own constitution, flouted its own laws, just to do extraordinary renditions of citizens of other countries in sovereign nations so that they can just torture them. A country that invaded another country on false premises against United Nations resolutions. And when you look at these countries, you realize that there are some countries like the United States that kill by proxy. And by this I mean, you never really see an American hand fully revealed in a crisis. But the Americans really always play a very big part in so many things, but they never are really upfront with it. So you realize that in Iraq, they killed millions of Iraqis, but that never was shown on television, as Zimbabwe was shown, for example, last year when 4,000 people died of cholera, which really in a sense was also partly due to the sanctions imposed on the country, and those I will speak about later. And again, you will look at the farm invasions, where a meager 100 white farmers died, and I'm sorry about that, and I really do say I feel for these white farmers and their families. But when 150 white farmers die, and in Darfur only 5 million black people die, it is then, oh, look at Zimbabwe, the worst democracy in the world. And I just wanted to put things in context. I want to just repeat that Zimbabwe, I do not claim is a pure democracy. Like, there is no pure democracy on earth. But at the same time, what I do want to claim is that Zimbabwe is what I would call a pseudo-democracy. It is a country that is moving fast towards democracy. And I just wanted to dispel some of the misconceptions that Zimbabweans themselves, in a self-hating attitude, and other people who despise the country for whatever reason, are spreading such rumors that make the country seem like such an evil place, when in actual fact Zimbabwe is actually not too bad when you look at it in relative context. So thank you, YouTube. Check out my other videos. I will speak about land reform, the economy, and the sanctions, all the misconceptions on those topics. Thank you very much.